Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal Podcast. Our guest today is Nikki Barua. Nikki is a serial entrepreneur, a keynote speaker, a best-selling author, and she's leading the movement to make people exponentially capable in the AI age. Nikki, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for inviting me, Krish. I'm thrilled to be here.
Well, I'm super excited. We had a quick chat before we hit record, so we have an idea, at least I have an idea as to what I want to get started with here. But before we do that, Nikki, if you could just introduce yourself to our audience, like who you are, what
Yeah.
you do, and then after that, we can jump into the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the through line of my story has been all about reinvention, from whether I was coming to America as an immigrant from India to building my career in corporate strategy and digital transformation to becoming an entrepreneur and building multiple businesses that have all been in the business of making elephants run. I've helped some of the world's largest companies reinvent themselves and become more agile and innovative. And today I'm thrilled to take all of those experiences and lead Flipwork, which is focused on helping companies prepare for the AI age and really reinvent how their people think, work, and collaborate.
I don't have very many Indian people on the podcast, right? You're probably the third one, if
Yeah.
memory serves me right. By virtue of being somebody who's also from India, even if a different part of India. Uh, and given the context we live in, here's a question. And again, please
Yeah.
feel free to not have to answer this question. Um, Immigration. Um,
Yeah.
if you want to answer this question, your thoughts on being an immigrant, a legal immigrant in America, what your experience has been. If you have to say something to
Yeah.
folks watching this from the US, most of our audience is in the US who are, say, non Indian people,
Yeah.
what would it be? And if you have to say something to an Indian person, perhaps watching this in India, what would that be?
Yeah. Well, I'm not an expert in immigration other than my own personal experience as an immigrant. For me, when I think about my journey coming into the US in 1997, I think you and I both came to the US same month, same year. So that's an interesting commonality we have. But my entire journey, all the way until I became a US citizen, was filled with so much anxiety. That was the through line of what I experienced at any given moment. I started off with a student visa, doing my MBA on an F1 visa. I didn't know if I would get a job and get an H1B visa. And all throughout my 2 years of study in the US, I kept thinking any minute, like I would have to pack my bags and go back home. And I was excited when I got my dream job and they sponsored my H1B. But then, that has a timeline and you don't know whether that's going to last. Does it get extended? During that extension, will someone sponsor your green card? And you start making choices. I realized how many of the choices I made, to the jobs I took on, to the paycheck I accepted, to the titles I tolerated, even though I knew that I was capable of more, I deserved more, and all of that. But you had to like fit into this box simply to um, meet the requirements of the immigration process. And making a choice even about the company you join, because they're the only ones at the time that would offer you green card sponsorship, and going through that for years, because if you recall that you can't really change your compensation too much, you can't change your location, you have to stay within that band. How much of your life and your career gets impacted because you're following that process until you finally get to the other side? And for me, it was a 10-year, 11-year journey all the way through until I got my citizenship. um, my overall thought on how I think about immigration is no different from me as a CEO wanting to attract the best talent to my business. It's the same idea. A country, if you think of a country as a company, its job is to attract the best talent from every part of the world to come in and build and to contribute productively to that society, and to follow its rules, and do what is necessary to increase its value. To me, any nation is the same, whether it's India and Narendra Modi wanting to attract the best talent to India, or keep the best talent in India, or the US wanting to attract the best talent. So I'm a huge believer in having talent, whether it's local talent or immigrant talent. Bring the best talent. But I also believe that you have to follow the process, because the minute you start deviating from that, you start to like remove any standards for what the criteria should be, because it's the same as, anyone could want a job in Google, but that doesn't mean they get a fake ID and start walking into the hallways just because they want to be a Googler, right? You have to get through the gates of meeting the expectations and being a productive member of that organization.
That's a great answer. But back to my question also, if I can get an answer, if you want to specifically, right? If you have to say something to people in the
Yeah.
country, right? Let's say folks in the US who either have an opinion, have a bias, or maybe don't even have a bias. They're just not used to it, right? A lot of people I talk to don't even know what a green card is because they don't have to know,
Yeah.
because they didn't have to go through the process. And they only hear and react to what they see on media. So if you have to say something to that person, what would it be? And then the second part was, if you wanted to say something to this person sitting in India or China or another part of the world that is wanting to come here to make that impact, what would you say to them?
Well, to the person who's somewhere else, that's my former self, right? I had all these big dreams, and I believe that America is the place where those dreams would come true, and it has been true. That is the life and the career and the success I've had. I don't know that I would have had the same thing had I not come to the US. So I'd certainly say for anyone who's abroad and dreaming of it, this is the greatest time in modern human history. And a lot of the innovation that is changing the world and defining a future is happening right here in the US. So it's a great time to be here. But you have to meet the expectation and follow the rules in how you get here. And, it's to find shortcuts in that. It does not serve anyone well. And as far as like people here that often don't understand the rigor and the level of sacrifice and pain that legal immigrants go through to make it here. Like I said, even in my case, it was a 10-year journey of, continuously proving your worth, proving your value, and making contributions that are outsized to be able to get the chance to be a member of American society. So if someone's gone through that process and made it here, it's because they've paid the price for it, and because they truly want to belong, and because they truly want to contribute and make a difference. And there's a vast difference between like someone who's staying the course and doing all of that, and is willing to give up what is familiar, what is certain, what is comforting, and deal with that much change and adversity. There's a reason why so many immigrants make great entrepreneurs. It's the same exact skill set of risk taking and vision and resilience that makes us that.
Amazing answer. And to people who are here, what would you tell them?
Well, that's what I was saying, is that, if people have gone through this much, then there's a reason why they are here, because they want to contribute, right? You and I came here not just because we had a greater vision for ourselves, but because we believe that this was a bigger platform for change, for contribution, for impact, that we would not have had in the small towns that we grew up.
Nikki, I'm glad I asked you the question because your answer is just amazing, and I think it was spot on, right? I'll add just one thing to it. I did a podcast on this. I think a solo podcast, if I'm not wrong, not too long ago. More than one, but I think one specifically where I talked about how anybody who comes from a certain country and migrates to another ends up being a representation of that country in entirety, right? You don't have to be an ambassador that officially has the designation and a position and a government title. It does not matter, right? Krish is a JavaScript developer who took the plane and came to the US. But to the people who have not been to India, to the people who have only heard or read about India in the news in good or bad ways, I am their only exposure. I've actually worked with somebody who was from Southern Virginia. He told me that I was the first Indian person he had actually seen in person, for real. And I don't know if I had to be happy or sad for him, but that was the truth. That was the first person that he had seen. So his judgment of India was not so much based on anything else. was not based on Aishwarya Rai or Priyanka Chopra or, you know what I mean, Rahman or Sundar Pichai or Satya Nadella. It was based on Krish Palniappan, right? Because that's the only exposure that you did have, which means how I represented the place of my origin made all the difference to him in entirety. And I think this is what I try to share in that 1 hour long podcast, which is you have to take this seriously, because whatever you do, when you're
Mhm.
not in your place of birth, even so when you're in your place of birth, even but more so when you're outside, you're going to be judged based on your actions, of course, but a lot of other people are going to be judged too. So you're in ways representing the 1.3999 billion people who that person never got an opportunity to interact with. So the onus is on everybody who's taking the plane or the ship or whatever means to get here or to get anywhere, to set that standard and the bar high enough that people actually look up to you and like, you know what, I love this person who came from India. I want to be that next Nikki Barua who came from Bombay. You know what? Because she made this place a slightly better place, right? Like Michael Jackson would have said, for instance. Yeah.
One thing I'll add to this is you have to be aware that being welcomed to a place that is not your own, that's not entitlement. You can't get entitled about it. You have to recognize that there is privilege in that, whether it was because of your academic credentials, your intellect, or your talent, or whatever. There was something in you, that is the reason why you're being welcomed. But that's a privilege that you have, not an entitlement of what you deserve. And that distinction is really critical, because that's what makes you a great ambassador, not only from where you come from, but also how you conduct yourself once you're a productive member of the society. Because every society, it's not about one better than the other, or US better than India, or vice versa. It's not about that. Every society, just like every family, every community, has its own set of rules, expectations, standards, norms, all of that. It has its own unique culture. To come into that and impose something that is not native to that, is reeks of entitlement. At the end of the day, infuse it with something that makes it richer, more diverse, better collectively, more harmonious. But don't disrupt it because you think you're entitled. And when you go into that, you also learn the balance and the difference between assimilation and acculturation. Assimilation is where, if losing your heritage completely, where you can't even tell the difference between, oh, wow, I had no idea you were from India. I thought you were born and raised here. But don't lose so much of yourself that your heritage is completely wiped out, because there's something beautiful, of where you come from too, and what made you who you are at a certain point.
You know,
Acculturation is finding that right adaptability and the right balance between the essence of who you are and who you're becoming, because you're in a new environment. And collectively, how does that add more value to the place? How do you hold higher standards? How do you contribute in a productive way? For me, the proudest moments for me have been being able to build innovative businesses, being able to create so many jobs over the last couple of decades, and being able to advocate for a better society. All of those things, I'm incredibly proud of those contributions, and I don't take any of that lightly or for granted, because that is the responsibility we all bear.
Nikki, do you have 10 more minutes by any chance?
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to publish this as a second podcast just so, because this conversation is incredibly important in the context of the world we're living in. And it's very different from the first part of our conversation. So I think it makes sense to be published separately. Uh, you stole the words out of my mouth when you talked about assimilation, because I was going to ask you that as a question. But you said something that was very interesting, and I was going to talk about assimilation. So let me ask you this, so I understand as well. So assimilation is an important word, right? Because people who are in a certain country have a fair expectation that when you move to the place that they happen to call home, that you make an honest attempt at learning their ways of life, right? That's a very reasonable ask. But I cannot use euphemisms. I'm just going to say it as it is, right? India is a very diverse country, right? We are a beautiful nation with a lot of diversity. But with diversity comes a lot of challenges as well, right? But just for folks who do not know the way India is just as a country, it's, years or decades down the road, we were linguistically separated as states in India, right? Which
Mhm.
is an interesting way to do it, but that's how it was done. Meaning, a lot of the people I even speak to, and tell me if you think differently, Nikki, don't necessarily know that India has like 28 different main,
Mhm.
30, I don't know the exact number, actual languages that have nothing to do with each other, right? Not dialects. We're talking tens of
Yeah.
thousands of dialects, but about
Very
thirty
distinct,
different
almost
languages, right?
40
Different
different.
scripts, and some as old as any. And I don't know, as somebody who speaks Tamil, I've been told that this is the oldest language, but that's a debate for another day. But it's a very old language, right? So we all have different languages. We feel very strongly and passionately about our own languages, even back in India. And it doesn't change much when we go outside the country. The reason point I'm trying to make here is we are very diverse as people. Now, there are some similarities that binds us together, right? Makes us united. While we appreciate the things that bind us, we also appreciate the things that actually create the uniqueness between the people, the peoples of the states of India.
Mhm.
But when you go to a different country, people don't necessarily understand that. They're not expected to, right? It's just too complex. So they look at you as an Indian person, right? You're representing your people, right? Your country. And I'm going to go to this is the backstory to my question about assimilation. When we talk about that, people take offense when you're not making an effort. I'm not talking about just Indian people here, right? I'm talking about people, immigrants in general, where you don't make an honest attempt at becoming part of that larger society in that country. You come from wherever you come from, follow your ways of life and culture based on how you may have lived in your own countries, right? Continue to only socialize with with people from that part of the world, speak
Mhm.
that language, which is fine, right? You said that you should not
Mhm.
lose your identity yet be assimilated. I want to know how to make that happen. What would you say that are some of the good and not so good ways of making that happen, so you do your part as an immigrant to be assimilated, but at the same time you're not losing your roots, because if you do lose your identity, then you cease to exist as a person, right? So you're going to have to find that fine balance. And how do you do that? What are some good and bad ways that you've seen people doing it?
Yeah, great question. Well, before we even think about people coming to the US, let's just take the example of people within India moving from state to state, right? You and I grew up in big cities, but even with our big cities, I grew up in a way bigger city than you did, right? And when people come to Mumbai, it doesn't matter what part of the world they come from, they start to speak the local language. That's an example of adapting to change. Because let's even take Hindi is spoken in Mumbai. It's a very different Hindi from the Hindi spoken in Delhi. Completely different, right? It's called the Mumbai, Hindi, and people start to pick up on Marathi, the local language. Often people start to speak Gujarati because there's such a dominant Gujarati population, especially in the trades. If you're going to be there, you can't say, well, I come from the South and I don't speak any Hindi, Marathi, or Gujarati. You're going to pick it up because that's the only survival mechanism. Otherwise, you can't exist in that society. You learn public transportation. It doesn't matter if you weren't used to that. You learn about, the way, the space at which the city moves. Those are things that basically you're fitting into an existing engine. That is the very reason you came there in the first place, was because you were attracted to that rocket ship. And once you get on that, you're going to move at the velocity and the pace of that rocket ship and follow the mechanics of that rocket ship, and interact with people on a rocket ship just the way it is designed for. And the same is true for people coming to the US as well. Whether that means picking up the etiquette of communication styles, the social etiquette, the rules and expectations. So you take something like personal space. Any big city in India, there's no context of personal space, right? Or even gossip, or social norms about asking questions about the first thing you meet someone. It's like, are you married? like, why are you not married? How many kids do you like? Those kind of things that are completely normal. I mean, I've been to like strangers' homes, and within the first 5 minutes, they go so deep into asking deeply personal questions, which would never happen in American society. So that's an example of just social etiquette of what you embrace and what adapt to. Or whether it is things like, just to me, one of the other common examples is things like trash. It seems like such a basic thing, but like things that you don't think about when people are walking the streets in another place, versus you would never throw trash on the road here, even in a big city. So those are more of how you live. But the bigger things are how you treat other people and how you follow what is the expected way of operating, whether in a workplace or with your neighbors or in your community. Being able to assimilate with that is necessary, because you came here for a reason, because you are attracted to what this society promised for you and for your future and for your family. And so you can't change that because you're holding on to the past. But at the same time, the acculturation part of what I mean is, for me, like, I celebrate every Indian holiday, every Indian festival. I still, I'm a really good cook, and I make, all kinds of Indian dishes, right? So my food habits are still predominantly Indian. My social celebration is still predominantly Indian. I've got a really diverse group of friends, including many Indian friends, including my best friends who I've known since the age of 3. That's still very much part of my upbringing. I haven't shed all of that to say, oh well, now you're not, you're my past, not my future. But I've adapted in the ways that go back to the whole promise of why I came here in the first place. And that's really, finding the right balance that respects the society here and honors the society where you came from.
You know what, Nikki, I'll tell you something. When you want to end this, give me a 3-minute notice and I'll wrap this up, I promise, right? The problem here is you say very interesting things and you say them in very interesting ways that I'm not able to find the natural point to end that, right? So I'll tell you in the
Well,
three
today is
minutes.
Sankrant. It's an Indian holiday, and actually, like, my family is from Assam, so it's Bihu.
Oh,
I don't know if
happy,
you
you
guys.
said it's Bihu?
Happy Bihu. Yeah, it's
Happy
Bihu.
Bihu. So is
Yeah,
it the harvest festival?
it is the harvest festival.
Okay, so we call it Pongal in
Pongal, yeah,
Tamil. Yeah, so
exactly.
it's
So
Pongal
your wife is
first.
probably waiting for you to go like
No,
celebrate.
it's actually tomorrow morning
Oh,
for
tomorrow.
us. Yeah, is it today for you?
Today for us, yeah.
But happy Bihu, very nice. And
Thank
then
you.
for any other Indian person watching this, I know a few different variations of this. I'm going to just say it. It probably may not be accurate. I think it's happy Sankranti. And
Yes,
I think it
happy.
might be happy Loharu, probably in Bombay and some other
Yeah,
parts of India, right?
that's in the
So
north.
yeah, and then I'm sure there's variations, right? That I think that's a great example to how diverse India is. It's
Yeah.
a similar festival, but we've got
It's
different
ironic.
names
It's
and
like the
different
Harvest
processes.
Festival. It's roughly the same time, but each one has a different name. Each one has a different style of celebration. More importantly, each one has a different like food that represents the holiday, right? I mean, almost everything ultimately Indian comes down to the food, because like we're such foodies, and like our social structure revolves around food and eating. So every holiday to me is just like, which food are we like actually celebrating with?
You know what? So it's a 3 minutes, right? Whenever you want to and tell me, but I want to ask you something based on what you said earlier. You said you took some good examples, right, of what we are seeing in the news currently, right? But I want to say one thing before I go to my question, which is, when people who are originally from a country expect you to sort of belong and assimilate and learn the ways of life there, I think it's like you said in Bombay, you got to pick up how traffic works, how travel works, how commute works, what it means to live with 22 million other people in a very confined, smaller area, for instance. It's a genuine, reasonable expectation of people who belong to that land.
Yeah.
When it's, I think that's what's misconstrued. I don't think it's racist of people living in a country to expect people coming into that country to learn that language, learn the culture, just be part of that system, right? It's just a
Yes.
human expectation. Because I will take an example of, people moving to the south of India, right? Like a lot of people, I come from Chennai, 100 miles from my city is Bangalore, the silicon capital of India, right? At least it was in the past, right? There's other cities coming up now. I've seen a lot of videos lately where people go there. don't speak the native language, which is Kannada, right? And the local people are offended because nobody wants to learn that language, even though that's the language of that particular part of the country. Now, it's interesting because I've talked to people who are offended by that, something like that, yet do not seem to come to terms when they move to when they go to a different country. They do not come to terms with the fact that the people of that land expect them to change. So it's very hypocritical, right? You expect that when it happens in your part of the world, but you don't expect, you don't return the favor or the reciprocities in that sense. So I think here is what I want to say. I did one more podcast where I said the top 40 things not to do as an Indian immigrant. Just by virtue of me seeing some other Indian people do that, I could only speak to my own people. I didn't do it as for any immigrant, but just for Indian immigrants. Because I had somebody on the podcast, I think, who told me that, every time she went to Target, not on the podcast, maybe offline, that she was a little more careful now because even though she was just a regular nice citizen, because of some video of somebody from India going to Target and stealing something, right?
Mhm.
She was concerned that if people would start looking at her differently going forward because somebody who looked like her did it. And which, to
Mhm.
my earlier point, Nikki, was we become representatives or ambassadors of the place we come from. So we're going to
Mhm.
have to make that honest effort in becoming. And I want to say also that I've done some travels in my life. And I've said this that, America is probably the one other country that I would live in if it were not my own country, which is India, is going to be the US, right? Hands down. Even if I went back 30 years, I wouldn't go to any other part of the world because I think it's a beautiful country with very accepting people. That's the raw truth, right? That is the truth.
Yeah.
Now, if things change, you've got to see what's happening for things to change in that way, right? Rather than be lopsided or biased towards, one side or the other side. We just have to be honest about, okay, what's changing, why it's changing, and why the perceptions might change, and hopefully make course correction along the way. But I think I'm proud to have had Nikki Barua on the podcast, right? As an immigrant who is actually in many ways a beautiful representation of how an immigrant should be, right? Minority as a woman minority, right? As somebody who's in that space, who's come here, created a brilliant career, really smart person, being able to speak the language without the accent. I've got to figure out how you do that. That's a question for another day, right? And I'm not the best judge of this, but I can say that I'm not seeing any. I've tried to lose some along the way, not consciously so, but it is what it is, right? There are times I mispronounce words. Like my son is like, "What did you just say?" And I say that I'm like, he's like, "Have you not lived here for like 30 years?" I'm like, "I know." I'll tell you one example, Nikki. A very good friend of mine, her name is Kathy. I know if she remembers me from like 30 years ago, but I do remember her. I came to Houston to study and I said, suggestion, right? I don't know if I'm saying that correctly even today, but I'm saying it a little bit better. I said suggestion, like a flat, no syllables statement word, right? Like Suggestion. And she was like, Krish, that's not how you pronounce that word. There's something called syllables. I was like, Kathy, I learned English, I thought pretty all right from some good teachers and professors. They taught me a lot of grammar, but they never bothered mentioning syllables. What is that thing called syllables, right? In a funny way. And then she sat down for like 25 minutes and actually taught me how to pronounce that word. But that's the amount of time it took for me to half learn how to pronounce one word in English. And there's a British guy who creates these videos on Instagram. He's outstandingly funny. I don't remember his name, sorry. He talks about the nuances of English as a language, and he takes the word clove, like Clove, and he removes the C, puts a G, he removes the C and the G, and he tells this other guy who's also a British guy. And it's a very funny Instagram channel. It's beautiful. It's absolutely brilliant. And he tries to explain in funny ways as to how difficult English is as a language, right? So
Really
I've told
difficult. It does
yeah,
not follow a lot of logic.
it's very difficult, right? And I'm doing my little part. I have a good friend who's Chinese. He wanted to improve, he's just learning the language. So I spend an hour every other Sunday teaching him. And it's funny, I told him that 3 years down the road, you're going to be a
Great. Now
Chinese
he's going
guy
to have a
in,
Tamil accent.
yeah, or an Indian accent, right? He's going to be speaking Chinese in DC with an Indian accent, but he's like, you know what, Chris, that's all right. As long as I speak it better, I don't have a problem. So it's a very interesting exercise. Yeah. So that's my side of the story, but this was amazing. So I think I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts there, Nikki, because I think it's important, right? I want to just try my luck in asking that question because it is important for people to understand that come here legally, be part of the system, and you're going to be a happy camper and you're never going to have any regrets per se, right? So it's amazing.
Well, I'll leave us with one perspective to think about is everything in human evolution and how society developed has always been founded on the notion of belonging. From tribes to towns to communities, everything has always been about a desire to belong because belonging ensures safety and survival of human beings. We survive when we are a tribe, right? And for a tribe to form, you have to have a shared vocabulary. You have to have shared norms, shared values. Um, that's what creates the cohesion. And when there is cohesion, there's safety in numbers because you got each other's. If you think from a very evolutionary standpoint, forget about modern society. If you literally go back to the caveman days, and if you thought, well, if we're all separate, we're going to get eaten and we'll die. But if we come together and we have, sign language and we are following the same rules and we have each other's back and we have trust and, we can protect each other together. If you think in terms of something as basic as that, all we have today is just that scaled up in many different variations. So when we perceive something that feels personal rejection or judgment or perceived racism, at its core, just think of, are you doing things that make you accepted within that tribe of wherever you are? That is a tribe of its kind. It has its own vocabulary, it has its own rituals, it has its own norms. And if you want to belong and be accepted within that for your own survival and success, there's an upside to that. If you belong in that, you will survive, you will succeed, you will have the protection of the community. But that also requires that you learn the norms and the rituals and fit into that, because otherwise you'll always be on the outside of that. So something as simple as that, anything we're experiencing today is nothing new. It is literally how human beings and society has evolved. We're just putting different labels on it. And it's no different in any part of the world. This is not something unique to one country or another. It's exactly the same. If anything, you're seeing, a return to tribalism because there's been so much erosion of that sort of shared belonging concept that everyone's really looking for. How can we have more cohesion? How can we succeed together because we belong together?
Beautiful, right? Let's end this with we talk languages. Maybe this is not a bad way to end it. How many languages do you speak, by the way, other than English?
Other than English, 4 languages. It used to be a lot more, and I have lost practice, and now I can read, but I can't speak anymore.
So, what are the 4 languages that is Hindi, Marathi?
Yeah, Assamese and Bengali.
Okay, do you mind saying like one sentence in each of those languages,
Oh,
which
you're
will be
not going to
quite
test me at that right now. No, I'm
no,
not going to do that right
no, or at least in Hindi, whatever, whichever. At least pick one or two that you want to say in one line in any of those
I'm going
languages.
to offend anyone on the show with that. So we're going to just leave it at that because I'm not going to start going in French and German and Spanish after that.
No worries, no worries. But that's very good to know. It's always good to know multiple languages. So we'll end there.
Languages too, again, are a way of connecting with someone in ways that create intimacy and trust. I grew up in a family where everybody was multilingual, and it was a mixed family. So everyone spoke a lot of languages, including Western European languages, actually, not just local Indian languages.
Wow.
So everyone's a polyglot, and it was very common. I was speaking multiple languages before the age of 5, and it was just how we bonded. And I'm even as a child knew that when we go to this side of the family, you start speaking Gujarati. When you go to this side of the family, you speak Marathi. When you go to this side, then you speak this language, right? Or you speak Urdu. And it was just, that's how you bond with those people, right? And it was an attempt to build closer connection and to have greater belonging. And to me, all of the things we've talked around this idea of acceptance and assimilation and immigration, all of that really come down to that. If you simply think less about what makes you different and focus more on what actually makes you, more similar, and build on what brings us together, we have more that unites us than more that divides us.
There's no better way to end the podcast than with those words. So, folks, again, this is the second part, right? I'm going to publish this separately. Nikki, Barua, thank you very much for both parts of the podcast. The first part where we talk more technical about the things that you do, in the professional world, and the second part where we talk more about India, immigration, languages, and assimilation, for instance. I appreciate your comments on both sides of that on both those topics. By way of introduction one more time. This is Nikki Barua. She runs Flipwork. I'm going to include the link to your LinkedIn profile and the link to your company,
People can
flipwork.ai.
also find me on nikkibarua.com, which is my personal website.
Got it.
Certainly, I'm very active on LinkedIn and flipwork.ai.
Awesome. We'll include the links to all those three places. Thank you so much, Nikki. Really appreciate your thoughts, and I can't wait to get this published. Much appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me, Krish. It was so much fun.
Hey, Nikki.